We're now live, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, hello and welcome to this meeting of the CAFM Asset Management Board this afternoon. Sunny through my window, but probably only briefly. We're still drying out around my way. Welcome to members, including, I think, members who are new to this committee. I have got Councillor Daniel Durrans substituting for Councillor Brian Smith. You're very welcome, Danielle. And I'm really pleased to report that Councillor Brian Smith is actually on the road to recovery, which is very good news. And I'm sure you'll join with me in wishing him well and to carry on with a speedy recovery. Really pleased with that news. Kirsty, can you tell me if there are any other apologies or substitutions that we need to know about?
None received, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, can I have then on the second item any members' interest? Do any members have any interest, disclosable pecuniary interests in the meeting? No. Okay. Admission of the public. The meeting is open to the public and will be online to be able to be viewed. However, in this case, it's recommended that public be excluded for the following item of business on the grounds that it involves a likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in stated paragraph of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, and that's item 12, and we've put that on as the last item of business. Okay, if I could move on then, folks, to the minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of December 2020 to be agreed as a correct record and signed by the chair. I had a check, members of who was actually at that meeting, who is also at this meeting, I see that it was myself and Councillor Megan Swift. Megan, I'm very happy that these are a correct record. Are you also happy that they're a correct record of the meeting? You're on mute at the moment, Councillor Swift. Can you nod your head or put your thumbs up if you're content with those minutes?
Yeah, I forgot I was on mute. Sorry, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, shall we move on then to the first substantive item? And that's the item 5, the revenue budget monitoring 2021-22. Now, who's going to lead on that? Is that you, Paul? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The report in front of you today is the second monitor of the financial year, which will be reported to Cabinet on the 8th of November, and reports the position at this point in the year in relation to the revenue budget for CAFM and the net budget of 8.3 million that's detailed in the appendix of the report. Just to run through the major items within the budget, Chair, just that members will be familiar with. Obviously, we've got CAFM employee costs for FM support and the other areas of CAFM, with significant budgets in relation to utilities around gas and electricity, repairs and maintenance, rent and rates, and service charges are all things that you'd associate with the building. At this point in the year, Chair, we are forecasting that there's a balanced budget, which is in line with what we reported to Cabinet back in August. I think, Chair, the only thing I'd like to say is that there are a few caveats. Obviously, you can imagine when you're managing buildings, there are a lot of things that can happen in a year, and that's really outside of the COVID pandemic. The COVID pandemic's perhaps changed the landscape slightly, but obviously we've got issues around energy consumption, particularly in the final part of the year, and the current forecast is sort of based on September, which is prior to the winter period. The forecast allows us to have a mild winter period, which is similar to last year, Chair. Obviously, we've got issues of repair, and maintenance, particularly again in the winter period when all the leaks and everything else tend to come to the fore. And then there's income around investment property income. The services required to generate significant income of around 700,000 a year for all the shops and properties around particularly around the town centre. So there's a few issues around that. But at this point in the year, Chair, that we are forecasting will produce a balanced budget position. I think sort of just mentioning a couple of things about next year. Obviously, one of the main issues that's coming out of the recent news is obviously energy prices and energy price inflation. We've seen some quite frightening stories around energy price inflation sort of being around 500% for domestic users in future years. And despite the fact that we tap into a YPO contract who do buy energy in advance, there are going to be some significant issues, Chair, that we might bring forward to members later on in the year when we know a bit more about energy inflation next year. So there are some challenges in the current year. We do think we'll produce a balanced budget at this point. Obviously, we need to keep on achieving the £4 million savings that we've referred to in many reports now, which is a challenge, including the prudential borrowing that's attached to the town centre office strategy. But like I said, Chair, on this point, we are on course to achieve that balanced budget.
Thank you very much. And it's a very clear report. Can I open up for questions from members? Councillor Lee.
Thanks, Chair. Are you happy that we use an actual signal?
I can see you all on my screen. I understand that Councillor Robinson's trying to get in and hopefully I'll be able to see him on my screen too, but I certainly can see you all at the moment.
Okay, thank you. It's just a question on item 4.1, background at the start of the report. Just a query about the £200,000. I'm genuinely not asking this for political reasons. I'm asking it because I sometimes confuse things. Sometimes I'm advised that revenue and capital are different. We can't mix them up. I absolutely understand that. Here we have, a simple statement that we've saved £2,000 in capital receipts.
Yeah.
Sorry, but increased in line with the number of budget decisions. The most recent saving allowance for a further £200,000 in capital receipts to be generated. So it seems that we've received £200,000 for the sale of something or other, and that's going straight into the revenue budget. Is that understanding of mine correct?
Mr. Greenwood.
Yeah, is that okay, Chair, for coming on that? Yeah, you're quite right, Councillor. You say that the council's capital programme, which is in the region of 130 million over the next 3 years, is different than the net revenue budget of 250 million that we spend on an annual basis. But there are linked in many ways, and I'll give you an example in that our revenue budget does rely on staff delivering a number of capital schemes and getting capital fee income that supports the revenue budget. And in the same way that we have capital and capital receipts, capital assets that we can sell, generate a capital receipt, and we can also use that to support the revenue budget. So there are always links. They are separate programs of work, but they are inexplicably linked. Now, the 200k that is mentioned in the report, you're quite right. There is an expectation that the work that CAFM do, the general work that they do, they will generate 200k in capital receipts from sale of various fixed assets. It doesn't have to be land, buildings. We have a number of fixed assets in our fixed assets balance sheet, and it assumes that we sell some of those assets, we generate a capital receipt, and we can use that capital receipt in accordance with government guidelines to support the revenue budget.
If I may, Chair.
Yes, of course.
Everybody at the meeting knows that particularly you yourself, Councillor Scullion and Councillor Dacre are both present. And as you know, we've talked about this many times. And I only make the point because sometimes if, let us say, an opposition councillor wanted to do this for the best of reasons in his or her view, sometimes it seems impossible to even consider it. And yet, just as a matter of course, we're reporting here that, yeah, of course we do that. I think on the scale of things, it's immaterial compared with the millions of pounds that we're talking about for the council. But I just make the point that I do get frustrated because once or twice I've wanted to do something like that and been absolutely refused. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. And I think Mr. Greenwood has actually made it very clear. And we work very hard in terms of where officers are working on capital projects, whether some of the capital can be utilised against those officers, actually work the costs of those officers working on capital projects. But you're right, Councillor Lee, that actually local government finance is an arcane Byzantine business often, and the government rules are often really, really hard to get to grips with. But thank you for raising the question. Anybody else on this? Oh, Councillor Swift, Megan.
Mute or perhaps now.
We hear you.
Yes, I think the report is very, very good. I'm not going to say it's that clear because I don't usually see this report, and it mentions so many different things. The idea that we're going to be a balanced budget at the end would be great, but I mean, everybody's got to cross everything to get there, haven't they? Yeah. And just on sale of things, I know it's changed a couple of times over the years, but things like if we're knocking a school down, etc., that usually goes to, well, it used to go to Children and Young People's Directorate as a way of doing some of the new school. And I don't know where it goes now. So can I ask you, please?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Swift. And you're asking a complicated question about I can't even say it actually, hypothecation in terms of whether capital receipts in particular can be hypothecated to one particular area or not. And I'm going to ask Mr. Greenwood to do a short answer in relation to that. And I fear it's going to be a nuanced answer, which is that sometimes by agreement they can and sometimes they can't. Mr. Greenwood.
Yeah, I think I'm going to agree to that, Chair, and just say, I mean, obviously it's members can decide on one situation a different thing than the other. I mean, if we do demolish a building and there are revenue savings that arrive from that, then they normally go to the directorate that's in charge of the particular asset, or in the main it goes towards CAFM savings because they're in charge of managing the corporate estate. And much of the 4 million that we've referred to on many occasions now, Chair, and again in this report, stems from the fact that when we sell buildings, whether demolish them, rebuild new buildings or whatever, those savings are somehow anticipated in the revenue budget for CAFM to meet the ongoing savings. But we can change the rules, you know, along the way if members so decide with a particular asset. Yes,
but it's something that we use really pretty rarely, and you're exactly right, Councillor Swift, that by and large that money gets recycled in that bit of the budget. I wonder if I could, there is nobody else, and I welcome to Councillor Robinson. I'm glad you've overcome your technical difficulties for now. I have to say, I read 5.1, that paragraph, and thought, well done. You know, these are very difficult times. You know, well done to CAFM and the team, and to yourself, Stephen, in relation to, and Alan, in relation to this. It's been a very difficult year, but nonetheless, the overall saving will be achieved. And so many of the council's other services depend on having that underlying well-running provision of the estate, as well as achieving of the savings, actually. And we are actually very grateful to you for that. Thank you. Well, I recognise Mr. Greenwood's caveats in relation to all of this, though. I was interested that there was a prediction from finance, so I didn't know there were meteorologists who basically said in bullet point at 5.4 that they were forecasting a mild winter, and that would help with the expenditure. I thought, well, if only, really. That's highways would be interested in that too. And I think the overall comments and caveats, you know, this paper is coming forward. It's come ahead, obviously, of the next revenue budget monitoring report, and we'll have another chance to discuss it. But I think we do need to really watch this very, very carefully, because we're in difficult times and uncharted waters in terms of what the impact of various post-pandemic and other things might be. So thank you. And as I say, we will have another opportunity to look at this report in terms of the next revenue monitor, budget monitor. So if there are no other points, Councillor Robinson.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Yeah, once again, apologies for the technical problems. Are we on item number 5 at the moment? Yeah, presuming. Thank you very much. I've actually got my notes on my ModGov app, the fantastic app that we've got. So just to make you aware that I might come off camera now, because I've had to sign in from my iPad because I couldn't get him on my laptop.
Yeah, understood.
But thank you for the report, greatly appreciated. Just looking at the reduction in investment property income, obviously we're receiving less income receipts than anticipated. I was just wondering, what types of investment property are we talking here? Is it mainly retail? So that's my first question. The second question is about three-ways and the additional costs. I appreciate there might not be an answer, but just a quick question regarding what's actually happening about three-ways. Because ultimately, obviously, we're putting in money to keep it up to scratch, or to maintain the property. But essentially, if we're going to be getting rid of it in the near future, then it's a bit of a waste. So those are my two questions, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. If I could take the three ways one first, I do happen to know, because I went to visit. There has been a large amount of money spent on removing asbestos from that building, and of course you know that it has a number of tenants, and indeed a new tenant of the doctor surgery there, and the church and the food bank and the social services. It was important that we removed the asbestos safely. And the question of the future of three ways is not one I can answer here at this committee, but certainly something that is exercising a number of officers and members in terms of thinking about what the future is for that building. In terms of your other question about the estate, the council estate in relation to investment properties, my understanding is it's a number of types, but I don't know who wants to take that. Paul, do you want to come back on?
Well, I know Stephen can obviously say more than me on it, but I think a lot of it is shops and properties around the town centre. You think of all the shops around the Victoria Theatre or around the edge of the market, along the town centre. We own a lot of properties, and the majority of it is that. There will be some rents and service charges along the way, but the main of it is shops and properties. And obviously in this very difficult trading conditions, it's perhaps not unexpected that the income is, the budget is challenging to reach the budget as detailed in the report. But as my understanding is, that's the main of it.
Thank you. Stephen, do you want to just
yes,
to that?
Just to confirm, it is mainly retail around the market in the town centre, and then we have the suburban parades as well, which are the former kind of together housing sites where we've got apartments generally above. So it is generally retail, which we have a few units vacant at the moment, which is a bit higher than normal, but they're also slightly higher arrears than we would normally have due to the pandemic, which we're working through.
Thank you. And I know we encouraged all of the tenants to take full advantage of the pandemic-related business grants that were available. Councillor Swift, do you want to come in on this?
Please, just a very quickie. It's disappointing, nothing to do with anybody here, that there are so many empty properties in the town centre. I think we expected, after how difficult it had been for everyone, that it was going to happen. If I thought, careful now, if I thought that our rents for some of the buildings were quite expensive, do we do any deals with new tenants, etc., to So we've got some movement on the building.
I'll pass over to Stephen to that and see whether we're industry standard or whether we do something different.
Yes, I mean, rents on retail premises are based on comparable evidence. So the asking rents are based on comparable evidence. Depending how long something's been available, we will look at rent-free periods or incentives over a period of time. So yes, it's something we will look on, but on an individual basis.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, members are asked to note this particular report. Members happy to note that? And we'll move on to item 6, which is the workplace office accommodation strategy. Who's leading on this? Dan.
Afternoon all. So just to cover the main points in the paper, really, just to summarise that there's been significant progress since the last time we met. We've met the major milestone for reconfiguring our core office accommodation, and new arrangements have been in place in September. Over the next period of time, we're going to be continuing with the enabling activity that we're doing across the rest of the estate, with specific focus on locality bases, touchdown points, etc. And I suppose just open up for any questions.
Thank you. That was a short introduction, and we do have one person who's a substitute, so there may be some questions that develop as we go through. Can I open it up to members in terms of this update report of where we are with a number of buildings? Whether there are any questions, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just a fundamental question about this, really. I realise that right now we've got a surge in reported COVID cases, which is quite alarming. But I think that the hospital admissions and the deaths are a clear indicator that it's not affecting the same group of vulnerable people as in the last wave of this. And that's probably because we're testing a whole range of people that haven't been tested before, that are predominantly likely to have had the COVID without terrible adverse effects. But nevertheless, there is a very high number now. But in general terms, decisions were made some time ago about this workplace office accommodation strategy, and decisions were made about what the long-term likely occupation or split between being at home and being at work was likely to be for council employees. So my question is, has that accommodation strategy been re-examined, realigned, or debated and discussed in line with the latest developments with COVID and working patterns that people will be adopting in the future? Because I think, as you know, Chair, well, I'm sure as you know, there are some discussions about many people actually like to be at work, like to be more at work than at home. And there are issues arising from, whichever way round people work. Some people won't like it. So I'm not questioning the numbers, but I'm questioning whether or not we're constantly revisiting this issue to see if we've got the balance right, because these decisions were taken when COVID was very different to what COVID is now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and you're right to raise it, and it's important that we keep these issues under review, because of course they are that valuable resource of our own staff. And in strategic terms, I think, and I'll hand over to Dan in a minute, I do understand that although we're working on that 1:5 ratio that's mentioned within the paper, and that we're beginning to, over the next few years, shrink the estate, nonetheless, actually, I think the capacity is more than that. But the question, Dan, for you is, have you reviewed it since that paper a year ago in terms of that ratio of 1 to 5?
There's a couple of points I just raised there, Chair. So I suppose from a usage point of view, we actually review it weekly. So we review how many people are actually coming into buildings, and we report on that on a weekly basis to Chief Executive, just to make sure that, just to see, I suppose, where we are from that perspective. Equally, we also work across services and with teams to understand what their needs are on a regular basis. One of the fundamental components of this piece of work is continuous review to make sure that the ratios are right for service needs. And we do pick up, additional requirements for certain individuals, who may not have broadband for a certain amount of time, or may have had a change in circumstances and require a different allocation. So we very much work on that regular continuous review basis. All I would say also is that the 1 to 5 ratio is the base requirement, the baseline model, allowing everybody at least a day a week in the office. And that there's a mixture all the way through to a full-time allocation and everything in between across the organisation at the moment.
Thank you. May I ask a question? It's at it's about 2.5, where you mention the question of hybrid meetings, and I know that some work done in a couple of the rooms in the town hall, but I'd be interested to know more about the rollout of that and the access that ordinary staff might have to that.
So there's two sides to this story. There's the internal hybrid meetings, which uses a facility called Teams Rooms, which of course this meeting at the moment is on Zoom. So it wouldn't work for Zoom at the moment. So there's a separate piece of work ongoing for the hybrid meetings that we talk about in the town hall for sort of open public meetings. But the internal requirement using Teams Rooms and the equipment that we're installing across our buildings is now in place. And we've had an interesting time of testing, shall we say, to make sure that technology is working correctly. But the intention is that you could have a number of people around a meeting room within a building, and then also a number of people working from home or working wherever it is. It may even be from another building, joining the same meeting and using that technology.
And that's a theory. How has the practice and the testing been?
So it's very interesting. I actually did a meeting. I joined a meeting in a hybrid way recently, which is our employee reference group, which is the group that we've committed to sort of work with throughout us delivering the office accommodation strategy. And I did the meeting from one of the meeting rooms using that technology, and that worked very well. We did have a slight hiccup a couple of weeks ago, and this was purely down to just the network and allowing updates through the system. So the system did go down, but it's almost we're learning from having this new type of technology and 365 working together. So as and when we come across those issues, we work as quickly as possible with our IT colleagues to make sure that those issues are resolved.
I think I'll bring Councillor Swift in a moment, but I do think you need to be conscious of the nature of representative democracy and the fact that we as members are going to need additional support and help to make that work in situations where we need it. But thank you. Councillor Swift.
Thank you. And thank you for that, Dan. I believe there are still plans to do different things, not just mend the roof at the town hall. Can we hope that somewhere in the not too distant future, that at least for the town hall, we know what we're doing? Because it's a bit difficult at the moment, and I know it's difficult for everywhere, but we did start looking, and we now have a couple of people with significant mobility problems, which we've done the checks, etc. But I don't think we've got around to any of the work. So can I just remind people that's important?
Okay, thank you. I think it's mentioned at 5.4C in the report.
Oh,
Dan, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I think just the update I give at the moment is there's a piece of work ongoing to identify all the needs, to try and comprehensively gather all the needs across the town hall, to then bring into one piece of work and identify what the options are available. To then work with senior colleagues and councillors to then identify what the recommended solution needs to be and how we bring that forward. So that piece of work's underway, and I hope to bring a report forward, or we hope to bring a report forward relatively soon on that to start that conversation.
Good, thank you. Councillor Lee, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. My question is a nuance, really, of the question that you asked. And my concern is about council services. Everybody, all the members, everybody present on the call, we want to provide the best services that we can. It goes without saying, that's the deal. But accommodation of the council employees is one thing, levels of service is another, and there are differences of perceived performance of various departments, and a number of these end up as being complaints brought to councillors, ward councillors throughout the borough. So my question is, who decides at any one time as we move through this very changeable environment on the balance between provision of services to get them back up to the standard that they were before, because there are still complaints that they're not yet back up to that standard, and the accommodation? How are we going to make that balance work? So we've got people working at the optimum home work life balance, but also we're delivering services at the very highest level that we're able to. I think that's for Dan.
Yes, Dan, respond on that.
Okay, Chair. It comes back to that continuous review statement that I made previously. I think from one angle you could say that the property is dictating what's then how then a service can be delivered, where I absolutely see it the other way around. As and when a service needs identified, we then come up with a solution to provide for that. And that's part of those ongoing conversations. So as and when services start to reset and reboot coming out of the restrictions, we work very closely with those services to identify what their needs are at this current time, sometimes in comparison to maybe how they worked previously. And indeed, if the request comes forward and it's very different to what it was before, we will continue to review those needs with those services and continue to put the right solutions in place as I suppose those services find their feet again.
I interpret from what you're saying in response to Councillor Lee's question is that it is the needs of the directorate and the service provision that dictates the needs of the changing estate and accommodation, which is the right way around, as it should be.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anything else on this item 6? Okay, can we note that report, please? Thank you. Thank you for those comments. We move on to agenda item 7, which is Asset Review Programme Q2 update. And of course, we'll be having another 2 of these later in the year. Who's going to lead on this one? Is that you again, Dan?
Me again, Chair. Maybe won't go as quickly through my review on this one as the first time, because I would just like to sort of celebrate that we're nearing completion of this first phase of the Asset Review Programme, and that's been a number of years in the making. Since we last met, we've reopened Elland Library and the hub that now offers for children's services, and as a locality base for an office base. And so that's a linkage with the previous report on the office accommodation strategy. It is also a base that will provide a touchdown facility for the Lower Valley in the near future. That space hasn't yet fully been opened up to allow colleagues to touch down there yet. But it's a huge success, and I do invite all members to go and visit that site as soon as possible, because it is a fantastic example of bringing services together and collaborating within the council. What I also would like to just direct towards is the ongoing work at Westgarth, which is providing the borough-wide respite care hub for adult services. That project's still in progress, but it's nearing completion, with the intention that will be open just after into the new year, just after Christmas. Work is due to complete from a contractual point of view towards the end of November, start of December. So then it allows us to do all that internal fit out work that we do, furniture installation and that side of things, for then the service to move across and commensurate from that facility. Again, another fantastic piece of work, and it's a mixture of architecture. It's sort of an old Victorian house with a real modern extension with a green roof and all that side of things. So it's a really good example, a good piece of work, example of a piece of work that services coming together and working together to get that end result in place. The only final piece of work that's currently on hold, but we did make a start on, is the work in Todmorden. And very much we felt it should be kept on hold for now, just with the linkage of the work that's going on in the town, with all the funding that's around, and just with some of the complexities around partnership working and that side of things. So as and when that becomes a little bit clearer, we'll bring that work back on stream. One of the main pieces there was creating a new touchdown point within Todmorden Library. Work did commence there pre-pandemic and was just about finished as we went into the COVID pandemic. But as I say, it's been on hold since then. But I hope that'll soon come back on stream in alignment with the rest of the touchdown points and locality basis work. So overall, I think it's a great success from when we first brought that report forward. Coming to the end of that, and I suppose the ongoing work is going to be the work around the core estate and that next chapter, if you like, of work that we're doing across CAFM.
Thank you. Questions or comments from members? Councillor Swift, you're on mute at the moment.
Thank you. Sorry about that, Chair. Yeah, two things. I'm amazed that you've got so many things that are working, you know, because we all know that, you know, it's difficult. And sometimes when you're trying to do work in buildings or outside, the way things are at the moment, you can't get either the materials or anything else. And hopefully we never need a HGV driver. My other question is, like Wellgarth. Wellgarth used to be a children's home, but it was a beautiful building inside, but it wasn't really a children's home. Now, we thought, well, I thought, and it's obviously had change of plans. Who makes the decision that that's going to be, I don't know, an adult facility and how that's going to work? Do you sort of, when it gets anywhere near, talk to the directorates and find, you know, people that might be in it or going to it?
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, okay, so I think the first point was about working through the pandemic and the shortage of supplies. Indeed, we had that with Elland Library. Just as we started on site, we went into lockdown and we had to close site. We had all the site compound there waiting and ready for the work. So we worked through that, and fortunately orders were placed pre-pandemic, and we had very little impact to the project, I'm happy to say, in consequence of the pandemic. I think the second point is I'm probably going to take it as a general point, just around the asset review programme, very similar to what I suggested in the previous point on the previous paper. It's understanding what the service needs are, and then trying to first of all look within our own estate and what properties do we have across the borough that we could potentially make fit for purpose to suit those needs, and before then looking at any maybe neighbouring or partnering partner properties. And before potentially acquiring anything new. So I think answering the question is we do have I'd probably say continuous dialogue with services and at service level and directorate level to understand immediate and longer term needs. And then just to reiterate, it's looking at then across the estate. It may well have been used by children's services previously, but if it's a property that may be becoming surplus, or there may be an opportunity to have a co-location or a joint need, then of course we'll pull that together and bring and form a proposal. Then that will then go through the normal process of decision making.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan.
Can I just pick a couple of items up on this paper? I mean, I would really endorse what has been said about Elland Library. I think it's a particularly interesting project in terms of refurbishing an interesting historic building and modernising that for use in the current circumstances. And it's also very attractive what they've done in terms of the glass and so on. And I wonder if officers could perhaps facilitate across, I know the ward councillors have done a visit, but a cross-party visit from this committee, I think would actually be a useful illustration of what money is being spent on and how old buildings are refurbished for modern purposes. I don't know if members on this call would be interested to have a short visit, you know, half an hour off that building, so 1 or 2 nods. So perhaps if we could organise that. And I think it possibly is an opportunity to illustrate what a touchdown point and hub arrangement might be, how that looks in practice, really. So perhaps if we could talk after this meeting and just see if we can actually set that up, because I think it's such an important thing for Elland. The other thing is that at the bullet point C on the last bit of 2, I liked tremendously, and I'm sure other councillors will join me in saying the original forecast in terms of capital receipts, etc., was prudent. The estimates were prudent, and it's anticipated that the overall receipts will be greater, which will offset the capital borrowing requirement. I think we like that very much, and we'd like you to do more of that, please. But well done. If there's no other points, can we note that report, note the progress, and look forward to the next phase when there'll be different buildings beginning to appear on that update report? Thank you to officers for that. Okay, if we could move on to a different perspective on the same issues, and that's the Public Sector Decarbonisation Fund, very topical in the first week of COP26. Who's going to lead on this report? Is that you, Andrew? You're on mute, Andrew. Still on mute. Keep trying.
There you go.
Yep.
Right, let me minimize this. Yeah, okay, so Decarbonisation Fund. We're now up to Decarbonisation Fund 3. We put in for Decarbonisation Fund 1, and our bid was successful. As part of Decarbonisation Fund 1, we received funding through Energy Accelerator and Low Carbon Skills Fund. So we managed to get funding of in total about 150,000. So we had a great start with our REBA 3 designs and our feasibilities, and so we were well prepared. We worked with some of the leading country's experts on heat pumps, who were Sweco, Turner Townsend, and Watermans. So we were absolutely delighted when our bid was accepted, and the total cost, and just to say that the cost that we bid for in our feasibilities was based on £500 per tonne of carbon saved. So we were able to reach a fund of 2.852 million. But required after the feasibilities 3.2 million. So we asked the Cabinet and the Council to fund the 350,000, which they kindly did. So in terms of Decarb 1 and so what's happening and what sites, so there are 2 different sort of technologies. So in 3 buildings, which are Manor Heath, Halifax Town Hall, and Todmorden Market, we're installing air source heat pumps, which will sit in plant rooms, or in the case of Halifax Town Hall, will be located on the roof. So we're very excited about the stage we're at. And And just to go back a little bit, initially, so the fund is managed through Salix, and initially all the schemes needed to be finished by September, October this year. But we know with the problems of COVID and supply chain and everything else, there wasn't anybody in the country who was delivering for September and October. Our own plans, due to our relationship with Salix, we've managed to defer the fund and the funding until end of March 2022. But by then we have to have delivered on site and completed the 6 schemes. So back to the air source heat pump. Manor Heath is going to get 2-stage heat pumps. Halifax Town Hall, we did some additional work in Halifax Town Hall because we had to create a plant platform on the roof. We've spent something like 300,000 on the platform, but included in that are re-insulation of the roof and double glazing of the roof. And so it gives and that work is progressing now, will be completed in the next 8 weeks. The other thing we've had to deal with, we've had on all sites, we've had to deal with heat pumps take electric power and not gas, obviously. And so each of the sites has needed a power upgrade, so low voltage power upgrade, which we've dealt with through Northern Power Grid, and we're on plan to complete all the upgrades in power. So the third site on air source heat pumps is Todmorden Market, where an air source heat pump is going in. So that's the air source. In terms of procurement, we tendered each of the packages, the air source and the ground source. Synergist, who are based in the northeast, won the air source heat pump, and they seem to be doing a good job. And on the ground source heat pumps that I'll start to talk about now, Hex Energy, who are based in the Midlands, were appointed. So picking up the ground source heat pump, it's the same sort of technology, but it relies on the ground, obviously. And in general, on 2 sites, Brighouse Library and Bankfield Museum, the technical submission is all about deep boreholes. When I say deep boreholes, these are boreholes into the ground to a depth of 150 meters. In Bankfield, we've got 25 boreholes going in. In Brighouse, we've got 15. And so the third site is Spring Hall. Spring Hall is very different in terms of it not being deep borehole, and let's call it shallow boreholes, or shallow trenches, which are 1.3 meters deep, and that covers the whole of the football pitch, includes heating for the museum store, and the trenching work has started there, and has also started at Brighouse Library. So we're quite well on. This week, a few signs are going up on Brighouse and Bankfield and Spring Hall, so the public are aware of what we're doing. We're confident we're going to deliver by March next year. We're very confident that the 392 tonnes of carbon will be saved, and we're very happy that we're getting experience in new technology to help us in the future in other funds that come along. So that's where we are in Decarb 1. Slightly after we were awarded Decarb 1, Decarb 2 came along. Decarb 2 was a much lower fund, was basically based on fossil fuel replacement, and we just didn't have the resource, or I could even say the stamina at that time to put forward a bid. The but is Decarb 3 has come along, and so we saw an opportunity in Decarb 3. We looked at quite a few buildings and selected Todmorden Sports. So Decarb 3, the funding opened on the 5th of October. Our bid went in on the 15th of October. The fund is awarded on a first come first served basis, and we will know in January whether we have been successful or not. We have bid for 1.725 million. We need 2.075 million. So again, we're producing a cabinet report to ask for the 350,000 of additional funding required. The threshold on this one's a little bit different. It's even lower. It makes it even tougher for us. It's £325 per tonne of carbon. So the other thing about Todmorden Sports, it's going to be air source heat pump. It's going to be quite a significant unit on site. It's going to require a new substation, so that's about 200,000 for that. We've included roof PV, so within the funding, we're expecting some money to be able to put roof PV. We've also included microfiltration. So within the bid, we are looking to replace the old sand filters with the new microfiltration technology, and we're also going to need to upgrade the pool air handling units so they can be brought up to a temperature of 65 degrees C. So quite excited. In terms of Todmorden Sports, as we're aware, is 20 years old. The gas boilers are at end of life. The main source of heat and electricity comes from a gas-fired combined heat and power unit, which again, 20 years old, end of life. And this fund is all about end of life equipment. To be honest, it's anything that's 20 years old. So exciting times. Looking forward, very confident we're going to get Decarb 3 funding. Be very surprised and disappointed if we don't, but we'll know that in January. Okay. So, is there any questions?
Thank you very much, Andrew. That was very comprehensive, and thank you for the written report as well. I've got one or two questions which will probably show the shallowness of my understanding of some of the new technologies. Questions or comments from members? Councillor Derrans. Danielle.
Thanks, Chair. I don't know if this is appropriate or in the right area, so I'm sorry if I've got a bit lost. It was said earlier that some of the electric's been banked in order to keep the utility bills a bit lower. I know when you have a ground source heat pump, you rely on electric, and you can obtain different tariffs because of the buy off. Is that going to affect the banked? I can't remember the utilities that you've already kind of committed to. Am I making sense? Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think we'll be able to claim anything there. I mean, it's a whole separate discussion around our utility costs in 2022, 23. We're looking at that closely. They do buy some energy in advance, electricity in particular in advance. I think at the moment that YPO have only bought until the end of March 2022. So it's another challenge. We won't get any funding or relief on our energy costs next year, and it's going to be a fairly big challenge. But more information and news on that will come out over the coming weeks and months. But we are in very significant conversations with YPO at the moment about the requirements for next year.
Yeah, I think it was a good question, Danielle. And I think hedging against some of these price rises is very difficult at the moment, as we've seen in the domestic sector market. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of observations as well as a question here. First of all, I've been looking at the background to this report, and of course I absolutely realise we're talking about the council's corporate estate here, not a wider issue. So just an observation for whoever put the report together is on 1.1 on line 2, we refer to the council's priority to be carbon zero by 2038. You might see that. And then in the very next paragraph on the fourth line, contributing towards the council's ambition to be carbon neutral by 2038. Very different things, and also things that can mean different messages in a different context. So the first thing is, I just don't like to see those sort of statements put together when they don't seem that they go together. We're either going to be carbon zero or carbon neutral, and whatever we're talking about on this report, which I know is the corporate strategy for the town, for the council itself, I'm not happy about that. But I do think, and this is particularly for you, Councillor Scullion, and maybe Councillor Dacre as cabinet members, I think we need to be very careful about our terminology when we're talking about carbon reductions and the ecological issues for Calderdale, because to me, when we say the council is Calderdale Council. So for me, the council and Calderdale are synonymous. Not right now when we're looking at the council's estate, but when we're talking at council meetings about the council's objectives for reductions in CO2 levels and things, the council's objectives at council meeting is Calderdale's objectives. The discussion here is within the estate, and I do think it's a good thing that there is such a thing as a public sector decarbonisation programme, and I'm confident we've heard that a lot of work is going on to get the council's situation as we would wish it to be, even notwithstanding whether that's carbon zero by 38 or carbon neutral. It's something close. But what we mustn't misunderstand is the difference between the great strides we're making for the council's estate and the strides that we're making for Calderdale's performance against climate change. And I don't quite know, and I don't have a proposition now about how we can change the terminology, but it should be made very clear whether we're talking about our own efforts, which are laudable, and I agree with them, and the council and Calderdale's efforts, because they are very different things. We can achieve all the ambitions that we might have for the corporate estate, but still fail as a borough. And I'm sure you understand the difference, Councillor Scullion. So it's just an appeal really for going forward. We should make it clear at every stage that what we're talking about. But I do know at this particular meeting, we're talking about the council only.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. And of course, use of language and terminology is important. It's important that we're precise. I wouldn't like, in terms of the detail of some of the language, important though that is, to lose sight of the fact that this is a really important paper. And these, as you say, these are actions that are not only for ourselves as a council in the immediate future, but for the long-term benefit of the wider population of Calderdale and indeed the planet. I think we've touched on some of the difficulties in relation to this agenda. But I think in terms of the council's estate, I think it shows very much that we are conscious of these issues, that we are trying to put our own house in order. I think if Councillor Patient was here, he would be very precise on the terminology. And he would also keep challenging us to say, is this ambitious enough? Is there more that we can do? And I think that's a challenge that this committee really needs to put back to officers in terms of thinking ahead, in terms of being ready for the other bits of money that are going to come down the pipeline. And that's something really for a kind of wider discussion with senior officers, because if this is the new reality that we're living in terms of nationally held competitive bidding for particular bits of money, then the game shifts really into sort of having projects coming down the pipeline. And that's a new challenge for officers really. And we are bidding and competing against other councils for some of these things. So there's really quite a lot to take into account. I see Andrew nodding. Andrew, thank you very much for this work. I do feel that, and it's something we need to talk about as a cabinet and as a wider council, is how we actually improve our own understanding really of some of the, what seemed to me as a layperson and as an older layperson, some of the terminology is quite hard to get your head around in terms of what it really means. I found myself thinking this morning, do you know, I don't really understand fully the difference between green and blue created hydrogen, for example, and I feel I should. So as you say, one of the things you've learned from the programs we've had thus far is we've got the learning. And I think we're all feeling our way in terms of some of this program of work. And it would be helpful perhaps to work with members in terms of, just as lay people who are also trustees of this fantastic borough, of just improving our own depth of knowledge in relation to these issues. But thank you for the paper. Are members happy to note the paper?
Yeah, but can I come in, Chair?
Of course you can, Councillor Swift.
Yeah, I've got the problem that I can hear everything, but I can't fetch the pictures up, so apologies. I wanted to comment really before Councillor Lee, because what was being said at that point all sounded very positive to me. A lot of it I didn't know anything about. And I do think this is also important, that when we've got positive things, you know, we make sure the world out there knows we've got positive things. I know it isn't the reason for doing it, but it's a good reason, you know, it's a good result at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Swift. Are members happy to note that paper and to thank the officers for provision of the information and the bidding processes that they've been doing? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, can we move on then to item 9, community asset transfer? Speaking of learning, who's going to lead from the officers on that one? Stephen.
Yeah, Councillor Scullion. Yeah, so hopefully a very quick report, certainly the shortest report we've got on paper today. So just in respect of the community asset transfer, an update on the audit report which took place last year and the reporting requirements that came from that. So the report found that the policy and procedure were adequate, but that the monitoring was weak. So the main recommendations were around the monitoring and ongoing monitoring of the existing community asset transfers. The audit committee looked at the report in September 21 in terms of the requirements, and an update was given at that meeting. One of the requirements was that the ongoing monitoring should come back to the asset management board, to this board. So the reason for this report is to make a recommendation to the board that we provide an update every other meeting, so which effectively be 6 monthly, on the ongoing asset transfers that we've completed and the monitoring that we've done. We've proposed a draft template for the report at Appendix 2, which, if I just run through that very, very quickly, the top row provides information with regards to the actual asset transfer itself and gives details of how long the transfer is for, details of the group, and importantly, the summary of the agreed outcomes and the community benefits that would flow from actually completing the asset transfer. And then the second row is with regards to details of the last monitoring meeting, when the monitoring meeting is due to occur, and then the current position and any particular concerns with regards to that. Just as a brief point, when new asset transfers have been done, we are now looking to do the first monitoring meeting after 6 months, and then on a yearly basis after that, unless we feel after the first monitoring meeting that there is a need to follow up in in 3 or 6 months' time. So I guess really any questions, and if it's that the board is happy with the recommendation with regards to reporting.
Thank you, Stephen. Comments, questions, particularly about the frequency of monitoring? Councillor Lee.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, exactly that point I was going to make. I'm on the audit committee. This was discussed. When anything comes in front of the audit committee where the policy and procedure were found to be adequate and weak, my view is that they're the things that we should be looking at most closely. I think nobody would disagree with that. That's what audit's all about. And I believe in exception reporting. So if everything's working well, that's fine. But if something's only adequate, and if something particularly is weak, that demands closer attention. So my own view, particularly at this time, since there are a number of community asset transfers being made at the moment, I think actually, Councillor Scullion, you and I were exactly on the same lines when you mentioned the frequency here. I think it should be at present every couple of months, because it's a fast-moving situation, and I think that every 6 months, given the comments that have been made about adequate and weak monitoring, I think 6 months is too long a period, and I put that to you, Chair, as a suggestion.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Stephen, responses to that, and I'll then take any other comments and come back myself.
I guess the only thing I would say is it's doubtful whether we'd have something every month, depending on the monitoring timescales. For instance, we have the first monitoring meeting for Topham College on this Thursday coming. So I know for definite we'll have something at the next meeting. We've also got 2 planned in middle of December on 2 of the sports projects that we've done. So there will be something there. Until we've rolled out the monitoring process fully, it's difficult to know exactly when those will be done. But I'm happy to look at potentially the next 2 meetings and then see how we go from there as a potential option.
Okay, Dales want to come in on
Yeah,
this?
just reply to Steve Hoyle on that, Chair. Steve, if there's nothing to report, there's nothing to report. But I think that it should be noted that we do want to keep on top of this. So if there is something to report, it can be reported, and other people can have a look at it. That's all I was really saying. Clearly, you can't report if nothing's happened, but I think that at the moment there's quite a lot happening. That's all, Chair.
Yes, thank you.
Could I come in, Chair?
Yes,
I still can't see. I do apologise.
No, not to worry.
Yeah, I'm not the greatest fan of asset transfers, and I think we've worked too hard and served some of the voluntary groups, because the idea of having an asset transfer is in a particular location sounds really good. I just want to see with all the future ones, and I'm sure everybody does, that the bids and what we're expecting and what the groups are expecting all come into one, because I have known some where people have had doubts and we've still gone ahead. But that's all I've got to say.
Thank you for that comment, Councillor Swift. I've been pondering the point that Councillor Lee made, and he picked up on my introduction. It's a question of frequency. I'm not wedded to having a kind of tick box. You know, it's what matters, and I just wonder whether there's a further conversation to be had in getting to grips with this, which is about risk and about assessment of risk, really. And that's what we're interested in when we're sitting in the audit committee, as we're interested in generally. And it's such a useful tool and mechanism for managing markets as managing risk. So I wonder, and thank you for those points, I wonder perhaps if there's a further conversation to be had or further development really around risk, the nexus between risk and frequency and monitoring, actually. So perhaps if myself and Councillor Dacre, perhaps with officers, can have a further discussion about this, because councillors are right that we have got a lot of these at the moment. We need to be sure that the management, be reassured that the management grasp on this is good and fit for purpose, really, and audit committee have flagged it up to us. So let's take this away and just do a bit of further nuancing, really, of our approach. But thank you for that. Anything else on that? But we look forward to seeing future reports in a relatively short time. Thank you, Stephen. Okay, can we move on then to, if we note that report, can we move on to the delivery plan, item 10? Now, who's going to take this one? Alan, hello there.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just wind back a little bit. As you said earlier, we've got one or two members who are perhaps less familiar with some of you are very familiar with the reporting, because we do this on a quarterly basis.
Mr. Lee, if I may interrupt, highlights only. Let's
no,
not
that's
go back
absolutely
too far
fine.
in history.
I just wanted to set the scene, Councillor Scullion, because I know Councillor Durham's, for example, and Councillor Robinson perhaps have not been to previous meetings of this board. So just to set the scene, we have a 5-year strategy across land and property. And what you've got before, and so that started in 2018-19, runs through to 2023-24. So we're 3 years in. And what we do through this board is report quarterly. We have an annual delivery plan that runs April to March. And we do a quarterly report of progress against the targets that we set for each year. So what you've got before you today is Q2 report for this financial year against the targets that have been set for 21-22. So although we're only halfway through the year, as you can see, the Q2 monitor is very positive. And to be honest, I think one of the things that we don't do particularly well, and I think it was a point that was made by one of the members earlier, is we're not great at shouting about our achievements. A number of the things in the delivery plan have been highlighted through reports. And if I look at today's agenda, every single one of those items, from my point of view, is a success story, a good news story. And yes, there are issues that we need to focus on, but actually there's an awful lot of great work that takes place. So all 16 of the actions on the delivery plan for this year at the moment remain on track, and obviously we don't get complacent, we keep on top of those things. So you've received reports today setting out in more detail how a number of key areas of activity are progressing. You'll see that we're currently doing a significant piece of work that we've not reported on today around evaluating our overall approach to the management of the council's estate. Corporate landlord, you'll have seen that terminology in the report. We've made a lot of progress in recent years with lots and lots of successes, even going back to Mr. Greenwood's report at the very beginning. On a £12 million gross budget over the last number of years, we're now delivering £5 million worth of savings out of those £12 million. That's incredible when you compare that with the progress and the achievements as well. So it's not just been about cuts and reduction in service, it's actually been about improving the quality of what we've been doing at the same time as making efficiencies and reductions in cost. So at the moment, we're looking at where we are, particularly in the recovery process. It gives us an opportunity to just review and reset how we support the organisation through this next phase. We're particularly focusing on how we align, and this comes back to some of what Dan was talking about, we align our work to support changing organisational requirements. So as the organisation goes through the recovery process, its requirements for its estate will change. So some of what we've talked about in terms of the office accommodation strategy, it is very much not about the properties determining how services operate. It is absolutely the opposite of that. It's about service requirements determining what the estate requirements are. So we want to ensure that the council's estate continues to add value to service delivery, not the other way around, and that we use our collective resources efficiently and effectively. One aspect of this work at the moment that's underway, Helene and I are involved in conversations across the organisation with senior teams in each of the directorates to help us to better understand the current and future service requirements and priorities so that we can develop and align potential investment plans. So not only the investment plans in services, but the investment plans in the estate to make sure that they dovetail and support and reinforce one another. This is very much the beginning of a kind of a different approach and a new process that we hope will help to dovetail revenue and capital planning. We intend to bring a more detailed report on this to the next meeting by way of an update and next steps. So again, critical piece of work in terms of how we shape and reshape things to be able to support the organisation through its next phase. So we'll say a little bit more about that next time. So I'll just tee that up for now, Chair. Members are asked to note the report and the progress that we've made, and I'm happy to take any questions. But as I say, a number of the items have been discussed in a bit more detail already today.
Thank you, Alan. And if I could open with one question in terms of what do we learn, or do we learn from the way in which the NHS is managing its estate, and I suppose Crown Services and the police in particular, are the lessons that we can learn from them in terms of modern management of a public sector estate?
I'd probably offer two thoughts on that, Chair. I think that there have been some examples in recent years where we've done quite a bit of collaboration and joint thinking with other public sector bodies, particularly through the One Public Estate programme. But the other question I'd pose, and again, this perhaps picks up the point that I'm making about not being great at shouting about our own achievements, is what can they learn from us as well? So it's obviously a two-way street and an opportunity for us all to learn from each other. We don't have any monopoly on best practice, but actually we are, I would contend, and maybe I would say this, wouldn't I? We are a strong service that delivers really well. And as I say, I'd just refer you back to each of the items on today's agenda. So I don't mean to be arrogant. I think there are certainly things that we can learn from others, but equally there are things that others can learn from us as well.
Any other comments, or Councillor Lee?
Thank you, Chair. I think you do a fine job, Alan, and all your team do. I've just got one question with respect to the delivery plan, and that is, when we're looking at the overall council estate, we are looking at not using some of the buildings. So just wondering whether or not we look at other potential uses that we might have for the buildings, rather than just imagining that you know, we might sell them or dispose of them otherwise. Because there's been some talk recently about the potential to repurpose some of the buildings for housing. And we know that we need houses in Calderdale. Some of the buildings are in places where it would be good to have houses, you know, maybe revitalise some of the smaller town centres and so on. So in the plan, where on the one hand we might be losing a council property, are we considering case by case whether repurposing could be good if we kept it within the ownership of the council but used it for something else? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Alan or Stephen?
Yeah, please. If I can start, please, Chair. That's great. Three things, I think. If I can remember the third one by the time I get to it, because I often start with three and finish up with two. The first is absolutely. So just in terms of repurposing, actually, and again, another great example. You highlighted earlier, Westgarth was a children's home. Children's Services declared it surplus. It was no longer required as a children's home. We're repurposing that, and it'll be. I'm due to go out and see it in a few weeks' time. And what we've done is we've used the opportunity to repurpose existing provision into state-of-the-art provision for a different service, which has also allowed us, I think, to release 2 other buildings. So actually, sometimes it is. I've described this recently in a conversation. I talked about a jigsaw puzzle. I think often it's a Rubik's Cube. So it's a bit more complicated than a jigsaw puzzle, a bit 3-dimensional. And as I said, slightly tongue-in-cheek. When I was a teenager, I used to know how to do the Rubik's Cube. I wasn't particularly fast, but I got there in the end. But I think the team these days is far more fleet of foot than I ever was. So we do identify those opportunities and look for the opportunities to repurpose before we get to the point where we've actually determined that accommodation is no longer required. It's there for surplus. It's potential for disposal. So that's the first response. Is it is something that's kind of mainstream activity for us now. And actually, it was one of the arguments for the establishment of the service in the first place, because previously the council, I'm going back 8 years now, before my time, had a much more fragmented approach to the management of properties. So we had individual services managing their own premises. And the whole idea of the establishment of the CAFM service was that helicopter view, so we could see what the requirements were across the organisation and how we could make sure that we made the property requirements respond to the requirements of the organisation and so. So that's the first thing. Second thing is the conversations that I referred to in what I've just said with senior teams. There are a number of elements to that, one of which is, first of all, understanding current and anticipated service requirements over this next period, so we can better anticipate future changes and rather than be caught out and wrong-footed by things that occur that we're not aware of. And in that, one of the parts of the conversation is not only potential investment requirements, but secondly, any potential buildings or premises that are surplus to requirements. So again, we can identify where there might be opportunities to repurpose provision in the first instance, and if not, declare those assets surplus and obviously ultimately potentially generate capital receipt that will generate investment for reinvestment in the estate to improve the quality of what we retain. So that was my second point. I knew I'd forget the third point. Oh, sorry, the third point was, there is an item under the closed part of the agenda today, which just provides you with the latest update on disposals and acquisitions. So again, I think when Steve presents that report, he may want to supplement what I've already said if he doesn't want to come in at this point. And there are some examples there of how we're identifying opportunities for disposal and opportunities for making best use of those.
So perhaps, Stephen, if you want to hold your response to that point. That was very helpful. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. In light of Alan's response then, possibly, I mean, I was going to raise it actually under the last item anyway, but just as a bit of a preamble, by the way, really well done, Alan, on this. Really well done. It's always nice to see green boxes, but my question is linked to point 3.2, the land review. Obviously, once you've reviewed land, you've identified surplus assets, it's to how much consideration is given to the different options available to the team in order to maximise receipts from disposals. That's my question, because to me, and this is why it is linked to the last item, but there are a number of sites in there which possibly present an opportunity for Calderdale's housing company ourselves to develop those sites. And we're in an incredibly unique situation, one which commercial developers don't have, whereby our risk is incredibly low if we're developing these sites ourselves, and we're maximizing receipts instead of just disposing it for the end person, which is a SME builder, for example, to actually get a bit of profit from it. We're just doing the whole process. So my question is really, to what extent are options appraised, and also how much weight is given to our own development company when we're appraising options. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Chair. Sorry, I see Steve's got his hand up. I was going to say, I don't know whether you want to hold that one over until Steve's item, unless Steve wants to come in now, Chair.
Stephen, do you want to add anything now, or do you want to hold it until the exempt item?
Let's leave it to the exempt item. It's probably easier to deal with everything under one point, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. But it's a good point, Councillor Robinson, in terms of the balance of trying to maximise income ourselves versus a more immediate capital receipt, and also the difficulty in terms of some of the low land values that we have in Calderdale that give us some headaches. We're, I think, just about finished. If members are content to note item 10 and to thank Mr. Lee. And that leaves us on item 11 and item 12 to complete the agenda. Item 12, as you know, is an exempt item. Item 11, who's going to lead on that?
Chair, simply to say, attached is the draft work programme. Happy to receive any suggestions from members for any other items that they might want us to bring forward to future meetings. But what you may see, linking back to the last item, is what we do try and do is provide a bit more of a deep dive into some of the activities in the delivery plan on a kind of on a systematic basis, really. So to say, next time the intention is to spend a bit more time looking at the capital investment requirements and the dialogue that I've talked about in terms of future estate requirements. So some of the questions that we've had today, I think we'll start to provide a bit more of a detailed response to those at the next meeting. But so happy for members to feedback any other thoughts that they might have about future items.
Thank you. And we do have some time to do that. It was really helpful to have prospective agenda items in that forward work programme, actually, for the next 3 meetings. And I expect we will be able to add to those. So if members could either let myself or officers know if there's additional items for the agenda there. I think that brings us to the end of the public items. And I wonder, Kirsty, if we could now move to